Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Dais, a podcast about the stories taking place in and around El Paso County, Colorado. I'm your host, Scott Anderson, and today I am joined by Brandon Wilson, the Legislative Affairs Specialist with El Paso County. How are you doing today, Brandon?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for being here and for making the time. I really appreciate it. Before we get started, I want to add that if listeners are interested in more stories about people doing good in and around El Paso County, or hearing from county leadership about local government priorities and how they operate, you can find additional episodes of this podcast on your podcast platform of choice. But to get started today, Brandon, I was wondering if you could share some background about yourself and how you ended up here at El Paso County.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you again for having me on. I've been with El Paso County since August of 2017. Prior to that, I was working at a nonprofit in town, doing some project improvement work and some project management work, and just always had a desire to work in government. Was never sure kind of where in government I wanted to work, but just felt like I had that calling to be doing something that really did make an impact for the citizens of either a city, county, state, and just so happened that there was a job that opened up at El Paso County that's not currently what I'm doing, but had some similarities. And over the years, it kind of morphed into the current role that I'm doing right now. So
awesome. Yeah. So what was it about government exactly that kind of drew you to it?
I think part of it was just interest. My academic background, undergrad in history, but I did get a master's in public administration. And so just that idea of being a part of something bigger than yourself, that you are making a difference, that what the county does, providing services that really are integral to the city, to the county being able to function. And instead of it being about the bottom line, making money, it's really about serving the citizens. And I do appreciate that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so your role, the Legislative Affairs Specialist, follows under the Government Affairs Department of El Paso County. Can you talk a little bit about that department specifically and kind of what your main objectives are within the organization?
Sure. Yeah, and it's we're really fortunate at El Paso County to have a government affairs team. There are 64 counties in Colorado and a lot of smaller counties that just don't have the resources to be able to do that. And so we were blessed to be able to create a team a couple of years ago that just focused on government affairs. And so, we really exist to advocate on behalf of the organization at both the state and federal levels. And so we're engaged at the Capitol up in Denver, and we're also tracking and following what's happening federally in Washington, D.C. And so that, comes in all different forms. There's an education component with policymakers, either in our state delegation or working with our federal delegation to help them understand issues that are important to El Paso County, things that are going to have an impact on our residents. Honestly, the just impacting the effectiveness of the county is a huge thing. And so through that, the team supports the Board of County Commissioners and residents. We also have a constituent services program that is fairly new, but that has been a really great addition that serves, kind of as a go-between between the organization and the residents of El Paso County. And then we're also providing administrative support for the Board of County Commissioners, the county administrator, and the deputy county administrator, but primarily operating in that legislative space.
So we just got done not too long ago with the legislative session.
Yes.
I'm sure that keeps you busy, probably most of the year, honestly, but especially between January and May.
Correct.
Talk to me a little bit about what that experience is like for someone who's never been a part of it before.
I like to tell people that it's like going from 0 to 60 when the session starts, and then when it ends in May, it's like, hitting the brakes and going from 60 to 0 really fast. And so unlike the federal level, that kind of is just a different pace. It goes through the whole year. The state session in Colorado is short. It's 120 days. That's constitutional. Can't be longer than that. And so you see within that, 120-day period, just a flurry of activity. There were over 700 bills introduced this session, which is a significant amount in the time frame that the session goes for. And so our days are chock full of tracking legislation, working with our lobbyist up in Denver to identify what's going to impact El Paso County. That turns into analysis. We have a subset of of bills. Out of that 700, I think we track close to 300 of those bills. And then our board will take a position on a subset of those bills. And so I think they got close to about 50 bills that the board did take an official either support or oppose position on. And so our team is really the kind of the eyes and the ears. We're reading the bill, we're determining what the impacts are, we're reaching out to county departments to determine what they see as impacts, and then we're also engaging with municipalities around us, the city, other cities and towns in the county, and then also we have a state advocacy organization called Colorado Counties Incorporated that we work with as well, and during session have steering committee meetings every couple weeks and come together to talk through bills that organization has identified as having an impact on counties. And so then we're sending out bill reports. We're doing updates to our Board of County Commissioners and county administration, writing white papers. We're doing analysis, just a whole lot of academic kind of work. But then we're also as well trying to educate and interact with members of either our delegation or just county stakeholders that need to be informed of what's happening.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is, I'm not going to say unique to Colorado, but you have, I think, a pretty good split of both one side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle, and everywhere in between, honestly. How do you go about working with, you piqued my interest with Colorado Counties Incorporated.
Yes.
It's this organization that brings in, is it all of the counties within Colorado?
Right now it's 63 out of 64.
Okay.
So the city and county of Denver is the only one that's not a member currently.
Awesome. And, just looking at that, certainly you're going to have, even though it's local government, you're going to still have all sorts of viewpoints on, how counties should be managed or what positions they should have on certain things. How do you work on, let's say on that level first, because it's more of a local level. How do you work on that level to determine, what is best for that organization that is comprised of all of these smaller municipalities, as opposed to something like a state or a federal level?
Correct. Yeah. And the main thing, the organization exists to obviously advocate for counties. And so CCI kind of plays a dual role in that they are kind of the de facto lobbyist for, majority of counties, but that they're also going to be working on legislative priorities that the membership brings forward. And so you do get a pretty broad viewpoint, and through that process, you end up voting, and that's representative of each county. And in our case, we'll have one of our county commissioners participate, and they'll provide a support or oppose vote just based off of the county's analysis. And so you do end up kind of seeing some ideological splits, but then on some issues you actually see bipartisanship. You see that more frequently than you would think. If you're looking just purely at the breakdown of the General Assembly, you would think, well, it's one party is going to be dominating, but CCI having more of a local focus, those issues tend to, some issues are partisan, but others kind of break that partisan mold and are just, everyone recognizes that it's an issue for a local government and that it's important to either support or oppose that, regardless of what the party affiliation is. And so you do see a lot of unity within that group as policies being debated, which is really cool to see.
So just in your experience, how does that compare with that state level and that federal level, I guess, work that's done? I have never, I guess, fortunately, maybe unfortunately, I haven't been able to take part in anything like that from a government standpoint. So kind of compare and contrast that local work that's done with a group like CCI versus the work that's done at the state the state and federal level.
At the federal, and it is different. The state obviously is more focused on state centric issues, and so it's just a different process. It's a different pace. There is some overlap. We saw a lot of money become available during COVID that was allocated by the federal government, but was then given to states to use. And so there was some overlap there. But, as far as El Paso County goes, we interact a little bit differently. We've in the past had to just kind of tweak our approach a little bit, especially at the federal level, where with Tabor and some of the restrictions that we saw at the state level just around ability to go after specific grants and different things. We do focus a little bit more on the grant side at the federal level. Again, legislation just moves so slow. It's just a different beast, where at the state level, we can be a little bit more involved in either proffering ideas for legislation or being involved in the process of that bill, just something that we don't have a lot of ability to do at the federal level. And then another big thing federally that we worked on was Space Command. And that was an elongated process, but one that wasn't specifically driven by a piece of legislation, but was done more on the advocacy, the education, the relationship side of things, where we were working with not only our delegation, but reaching out to other members that sat on committees that had, influence in that area, just to try to explain to them why Colorado Springs was and is the right place for Space Command to be.
So how does working with other municipalities benefit your own efforts and those of the county, whether it be another county, maybe, in some cases you might be working with other states to, kind of coordinate on certain things. You're going to tell me, because quite honestly, I'm a little uneducated in that. But how does that work for you guys here at El Paso County?
And it definitely more of a local kind of flavor to that, but it's very beneficial. And I'll talk kind of at a purely local level. Working with cities and municipalities, you don't always know what is important or pressing for other municipalities within the county. We're such a large county that we have our priorities, but we might not fully understand what an impact is in Colorado Springs or in Manitou or Fountains. So having those ways to engage and to come together to hear what the impacts are, and then to be educated on how that is impacting a municipality. The way that we read something, it might not impact a county like it does a city. And so we could be looking at a bill or some type of legislative situation where it doesn't have an impact directly on the county, but it does on a city. And so we want to be able to support our municipalities within El Paso County and make sure that we're helping them to either support or oppose, whatever piece of legislation might be having an impact on them. And I know that vice versa, that has also happened in previous legislative sessions too.
Awesome. And so to me, I think government, especially when it comes to like the legislative part of government, Schoolhouse Rock can only get you so far, right? For me, it's a little bit hard to like penetrate the knowledge base and really understand like how things operate and, what things there are to look for. In your opinion, why should residents in general be paying attention to these government processes?
Sure. Because it has an impact, right? It is, each year there are hundreds of bills introduced that have, significant positive and negative impacts on the state, on counties, and on municipalities and cities and towns. And so it can be really, really overwhelming to try to dig through all that. But, that's, for Colorado, the laws that are created and executed at a state level are done just in that short 4-month period. And I've been in a lot of conversations where folks are, I get it. There's arguments that, people have full-time jobs. They can't pay attention to that. I just so happen and fortunately get, compensated for this work. And so it's something that I'm in every day. The average citizen just doesn't have that ability, but there are very consequential decisions made. The budget is set every year. Hundreds of bills are passed and signed into law that have either direct impact on governments or, can have, philosophical impacts as well. And so, from my seat, I can see it, from a much lower level than I think sometimes other citizens can, just based off of, what they have going on in life, and to know that we have a constitutional right to petition our government, that we as citizens have an ability to go to our lawmakers and to communicate what is of value, what is, important. And so I always tell individuals that it's, it's a chance that sometimes you think, well, my voice doesn't matter or my vote doesn't matter, but I believe it does. And the more that our delegation in El Paso County and lawmakers up at the Capitol can hear the voices of constituents, of citizens, the more that they're going to become aware of what the general, thought process is on a certain issue. And a lot of times it does feel like legislation gets drafted in a vacuum. A lot of the time you'll be told that something was done in a stakeholdering type of environment when, that seems to not necessarily be the case. And so, the more that our residents can, number one, just be aware that the legislative session happens every year, that it's 120 days, that, you as a citizen have the ability to testify on a bill, that, if you're hearing about something that is piquing your interest, that you can reach out to your lawmaker and your delegation. You can go up to the Capitol. You can testify remotely. During COVID, that became something that was continued on past COVID, where you can testify and your voice can be heard. And so I think that's the main argument that I would present to someone, is that your voice matters. You might not think it does, but it matters. And as a resident of El Paso County, you should have the ability to communicate that perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, just looking at where we are right now in time, we're at beginning-ish of June.
Right.
And, we have primaries that are coming up right now. We have even just usually on a weekly basis, residents able to come to Board of County Commissioners meetings.
Correct.
And provide their input on anything that's on the agenda or anything that's not on the agenda, right? Anything at all you can come and speak to the board about. So, I would encourage people to take advantage of those opportunities if you really do want to kind of be a part of the action, as it were, right? Making yourself feel more, I guess, civic minded is, do those kind of things. And, I think the point that you made is very important, because I think it's easy to feel like your one voice can get lost in the cacophony of, everything that's going on around you, right? But if you don't take an opportunity to speak up, then there's no guarantee that anyone else will, right? And so to me, just I would say a little bit more on the outside of that whole process. If there's something that I feel passionately about, it's my job to make sure that someone knows that, right? And so if there's something that you feel passionately about, you're listening to this and you're like, oh, there's this thing, you can do something. There are mechanisms in place to where you can, at the very least, be heard.
Correct.
And if it's considered, if it goes beyond that, then it may not, of course. But you can at least you have that opportunity to be heard, which still is one great thing about living in the United States, right? This is something that is not necessarily unique to our country, but a privilege that I think we get to have as residents of the United States.
Correct. Yeah. And it's kind of the idea of it's not, it feels a lot of the time like one person or a small group of people make the decisions. And so that can be, a lot of the time it can be really, it can be frustrating. It can feel like, well, no, my voice doesn't matter, but it's the aggregate. It's the more people that speak up, the louder that voice is. And we're in a unique time, as we come into an election year, where there's going to be a lot of dialogue around what the right policies are, right, what the right, path is, not only for the state, but for the country in general. And so I always get a little disheartened when I hear, and I understand it, that, when people feel like it's not even worth it. Like, why vote? Why try? But it's it's a right that we've been given, and that is something that I know I can take for granted sometimes. But I would, again, just encourage folks to just to pay attention, and that comes at all different levels, but to at least be familiar with that process, and to know within that you have a lot of opportunity to voice your opinion, and that is something that, is echoed in a lot of meetings that I'm in that include members of the public is to say, like, you have a chance to speak. You're telling us what this impact is, but the better platform for you is to tell the legislators themselves what those impacts are.
Right. So I think we've been able to cover quite a bit here, but I do want to give you an opportunity to add anything else you think would be important for listeners to know about, or maybe just leave them with something that you feel is a really important point, especially, like you said, coming here in an election year.
I would say, from an El Paso County side, the government affairs team, we're here as a resource, and we have the ability to do deep dives on legislation, and it's our job to inform our commissioners and our board as to what is happening, and so that's a service that we like to would say something that we take seriously and want to put a lot of effort into ensuring that all the information is available to decision makers so that they can do what's best for the residents of El Paso County, for the county. And so that's one thing I think is really important to reiterate, that it is a critical, there's a lot of different, I think, thoughts around the term government affairs, but I think it is a really critical component of what the county does on a day-to-day basis. And then I think as well as just, being informed and taking the time to, when you get your ballot, to understand the candidates and the issues, and just to, again, remember that your vote, your voice are important, and we have a unique opportunity over the next few months to express opinions on candidates, on ballot questions, and something that I would just encourage folks to not cast aside, but just to just to really be thoughtful and just to remember that it matters to participate in that process. And it's an exciting time, and we'll see kind of how things go. But again, thank you for having me on today, and hopefully it was informative and
Great. Well, thank you, Brandon. I appreciate you taking the time today and for all the work that you do here for El Paso County and for the residents here in the region. So thank you.
Thank you.
If you are interested in listening to additional episodes of Beyond the Dais, be sure to look for us on Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.